those taxes were ever paid.
No, they were not.
Yeah, no, they were not paid by Hunter Biden.
And since the statute of limitations was allowed to run, Mr. Shapley, you go on to state that in order for him to pay this, he'd have to pay it voluntarily, that the government doesn't have a way to compel him to pay it because they've allowed the statute of limitations. Not he got out of criminal, he got out of having to pay the tax, right?
That's correct. The civil and criminal statute of limitations have expired for that tax year.
So he has in his pocket $125,000 of money that should have gone to the federal government as taxes. When in the state of Ohio, you've got average family earning about $62,000 a household. That's like 2 full households of tax income that he got to keep in his pocket. The thing I wonder is that he could pay that today, right? Voluntarily.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Yes.
if he chose to voluntarily, yes, he could.
And perhaps Mr. President, who's supposed to be in charge of taxes coming to our nation and who so frequently tells us that the American people aren't paying enough taxes, might want to wander down the hall at the White House and turn to his son and say, Hunter Biden, why don't you pay your taxes for 2014? Because I got 2 men who just testified there's $125,000 owed and he ought to cut the check. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Ms. Norton from Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Shapley and Mr. Ziegler, thank you for being here today. We're obviously going to talk a lot in this hearing about the investigation into Hunter Biden's taxes. So I think it's important that we set the scene and make it clear what type of investigation we're talking about. Mr. Ziegler, what year did you open the Hunter Biden investigation?
That was 2018, November of 2018.
2018. Thank you. The Department of Justice announced a plea agreement with Hunter Biden last month. So I estimate that you spent 4 or 5 years on this investigation, Mr. Ziegler?
That would be correct.
Mr. Ziegler, in your testimony before the Ways and Means Committee, you said that when your time working on the investigation ended, it was both, and him I'm quoting, 99.9% done, that's end quote, and that you had, here I'm quoting again, worked to complete 95% of the investigation, end quote. Given this testimony, is it fair to say, Mr. Ziegler, that in the years that you spent on the investigation, you saw it nearly to completion?
So that reference was to the tax case. So the tax investigation, as far as all the work that we had done regarding that, 99% of that had been done to that date.
Exactly. Mr. Shapley, on page 12 of your transcript, of the transcript from your interview with the Ways and Means Committee, you described the IRS team that worked on this investigation as consisting of, and here I'm quoting, 12 elite agents who were selected based on their experience and performance in the area of complex, high-dollar international tax investigations, end quote. Mr. Shapley, how serious are the investigations undertaken by these elite agents?
I'm not sure I understand how to answer your question. How serious?
Yes. Do they have to be very serious to be undertaken by such elite agents?
Well, I think I can answer this. So we got to treat each taxpayer the same. That's the most important part. We're kind of the agents with the International Tax Group that come in there and that we have the expertise to work these complex financial investigations. So whether they're more serious or we have to treat each person, each taxpayer the same. And that's what I try to do in my job.
Yeah, I was referring to these particularly complex, high dollar tax concerns. I understand you have to give equal treatment. Mr. Ziegler, you called Hunter Biden investigations a, quote, complex criminal tax investigation, end quote. And I understand that it was an interagency effort involving the IRS, the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Delaware, and DOJ's tax division in DC. Mr. Ziegler, is it fair to say that this sort of interagency team is only assembled for serious and complex investigations?
So I can only speak to what happened in this particular investigation. The reason why other agencies might join an investigation, that just depends on the crimes we're investigating. Us at the IRS, we are the only agency in the federal government that is allowed to investigate tax crimes. So that's why you have to have, if you have a tax crime case, you have to have the IRS on that case.
Yeah, and you had lots of other agencies as well. Look, it sounds like Hunter Biden's taxes were subject to a great deal of scrutiny and rigorous review by a large team of expert investigators who had experience working complex cases. This investigation occurred over several years, spanned multiple agencies and divisions, and had an expert team. The time, personnel, and other sources devoted to this investigation make it abundantly clear that this investigation was taken seriously by both the IRS and DOJ. While our witnesses here today may disagree with the U.S. Attorney's decisions, it is undeniable that Hunter Biden was subject to a thorough and rigorous investigation. I thank you, and I yield to the ranking member.
Gentlelady yields back, and as we promised the witnesses, we're going to take a 10-minute recess, at which point we will reconvene in approximately 10 minutes. House is now in recess.
She was. Tell me what kind of piece.
Plays that into the fray thing for them.
All right, guys. So it looks like they are on break. They're probably fast forward, but we're gonna go ahead and play one of my neighbor's writings for you. What's it called?
Once more into the fray. Pretty sure the name speaks for itself.
I think so. After we get done with this, we'll go and fast forward and see where we're at.
All right, here we go.
Once more into the fray. It would seem as though our civil and political leaders have once again led us into yet another war. A war that poses the greatest threat to our entire existence we have ever had. A war against ourselves. This war has pitted America against itself. A war against unity through racial division, capitalism through oppression, and education through ignorance. The very leaders that claim to be the ones fighting for our freedom carry shackles and chains. Those shackles and chains are our reward for their assistance, their leadership, and our votes. We are a nation of free thinkers, dreamers, innovators, philanthropists, patriots, and idealists. We do not believe in robbing the poor and giving to the wealthy. We are the defenders of truth, justice, and the American way. We are the beacon for which the entire world turns to for hope. Hope for a better life, hope for a better future for their children, and defense against tyranny and oppression. Yet, while we have been vigilantly watching over the world, sending our soldiers and aid throughout to bring freedom and justice to all, we have left a blind eye to our own homes, our own freedoms, our own liberties. We have allowed corruption and socialist idealists to infiltrate every level of our society and systematically dismantle our nation. Now we are standing on the cusp, peering over the edge at doom, half of us wondering how we got here and how we return to those days of old, and the other half, pushing us closer to that doom, completely unaware of what the outcome of their choice truly is. We have seen firsthand, over several decades and nations, the failures of socialism. The unchecked corruption in the system and oppression of its people. The decay of wealth and freedom, as those corrupt leaders impose ever-tightening grips of control over their citizens. A perfect example of this is North Korea. 98% of its population live in poverty. They suffer and die from illnesses that have cures. All because if the leaders relinquished their strangling hold over those individuals, they would see the truth.
The committee will reconvene and
Speaking your mind. They had not lowered our educational standards far enough yet at that time. They had not yet indoctrinated a couple generations of our children into their socialist ideologies. It was not until they had brainwashed our children into believing America was a bad place, in need of dismantling, and rebuilt in the image of their utopian society, where all the wealth pools at the top, and everyone below, are indentured to them. Entitlement is not a practical ideology. In fact, it is destructive and self-serving. The world meets no one halfway. If you do not get out and chase your dreams, no one else is going to do it for you. We are the masters of our own destinies. If you believe the government has your best interest at heart, remember what they did to create this great nation. The murdering of thousands of Native American Indians. America did not create slavery, nor did we embrace it. As a matter of fact, the United States of America abolished it. We gave freedom and a voice to those who did not have one. We started a civil revolution to change the way people believed and thought after that freedom was shared. We, yes Americans, then strove for greater changes and ways of thinking to further create a fair and equal society where every American and even immigrants could pursue their dreams for a better future. Once again, it is time to enter the fray and fight for our freedoms. Forget about what those corrupt politicians, old establishment news outlets, and elitists tell you. We are not all racists and fascists. It simply is not true. Get out there and educate yourselves to the truth, then join us. America has never been fascist, and God willing, it never will be. It is your freedom to fight for it.
Amen.
Yeah.
What do you guys think of that? We're going to go back over and go ahead and continue the hearing. But in the comments, please let me know what you guys thought of that.
And is now back in order. Chair recognizes Mr. Palmer from Alabama for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. I want to welcome the whistleblowers and thank you for your courage, but more than that, for your fidelity to your duty to faithfully enforce the laws of the United States. Mr. Shapley, the statute of limitations has run out on a number of possible felony charges for tax years 2014, 2015. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And there were huge tax liabilities for those tax years, correct?
There were tax liabilities, yes.
But you didn't have access to all of the evidence related to those sources of income, did you?
Based on the limitations placed on us by Delaware U.S. Attorney's Office, that's very likely.
Okay. Well, the Oversight Committee recently reviewed a non-classified document from the FBI called an FD 1023 form, which is a form used by the FBI to memorialize information related to it by a confidential human source. This FD 1023 form was created in June of 2020. This is not a tip sheet. It's not a hotline. It's not a suggestion box. It's a legitimate source used by the FBI, and it was used here. Mr. Shapley, did you ever review the June 2020 FD 1023 form with information about Hunter Biden and President Biden?
No, I did not.
I reviewed the form, and there's startling allegations in it. What would you have done if presented with this piece of evidence regarding this potential stream of income? Would that have constituted an additional area of investigation?
So since I've never seen the document, I only know what's been reported.
Right.
So I can say that there were investigative steps that involved President Biden that were not allowed to be taken, and that information like this would have been really helpful to have from investigators, by investigators when we received any pushback, when we were asked to take names out of document requests or search warrants. It would have been nice to have information that showed why, that helped prove why those names needed to be in those requests.
Well, I think it's material to your investigation because it was, after all, other information that led you, related to Hunter Biden's lifestyle, that led you to launch the investigation to begin with. Was there other evidence in this investigation that you were denied access to?
Yes, there was.
Do you want to elaborate on that?
So one piece was the Hunter Biden laptop. There's a memorandum that I documented contemporaneously in my House Ways and Means Committee testimony that states what Assistant United States Attorney Leslie Wolf told us on that day. I think it was September 3rd of 2020. And that's that they had information from the laptop that they were not providing to the investigators.
Yeah, can I add something on that?
Yes, sir, Mr. Ziegler.
So when it came to questions, as a part of the investigation, we interviewed a lot of people. And as a part of that investigation, you want to feel free to ask questions. It should be an open environment. I realize that there are some attorney-client privileged information involved in this, but there was an environment when we were interviewing witnesses where you were afraid to ask questions questions that could lead to the presidential campaign. And this is after the campaign's over. So questions like that, it was restricted, and so things like that we were limited to talking about.
Well, it appears to me that you learned about the FD 1023 form through public domain sources. And I can only imagine how you felt about having been denied another piece of relevant information. And I think it's important that the committee understand that you guys who are trying to do due diligence, who are trying to faithfully execute the laws of the United States, were denied evidence relevant to your investigation. I think the 1023 form is a very important piece, Mr. Chairman, I want to ask Mr. Ziegler, at one point you wanted to move the investigation to the District of Columbia. Is that correct?
From the very onset of the investigation, yes.
Why did you want to move it to DC?
So are we referring, there are two different scenarios in where DC is involved. So when we first initiated the investigation, and then when we referred prosecution. So which time period? So as far as venue for the tax case, so venue for this case, we saw that when we did our analysis, that venue was either in California or DC. Well, I guess at the time in the beginning, it was DC. So that was where we wanted to start our investigation, was in DC.
But you were told that Attorney Weiss could bring charges anywhere. Was that your understanding?
Okay, so that fast forward to March of 2022, I had a phone call with the prosecutors assigned to the case. They said that our prosecution report went to low-level people at the DC U.S. Attorney's Office. Those low-level people reviewed it, said, hey, we're going to assist you with this. Here's what we're going to do to help you finish the case here in DC. A few days later, I get another phone call, and it's from the same assigned attorney, and they tell me that now that the U.S. attorney has reviewed it, that not only is it a no, but it's a no, you should not work this investigation in the District of Columbia.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it appears to me that Mr. Ziegler was misled, and that his instincts were right, that it should have been moved to the District of Columbia. And again, I want to thank you for your courage and your fidelity to the law. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Khanna from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Shapley, for being here. I understand you see it as your duty to have the strict enforcement of tax laws. Is it true that you have often disagreed with charging decisions before?
I have agreed with charging decisions before.
I'm saying, is it true that you have often disagreed? Your recommendations have often been disregarded before when it comes to charging decisions. Is that true?
I don't think disregard is an accurate representation.
They have been, people in your own IRS have disagreed with your decisions often before. Is that accurate?
That's not accurate.
Is it not true that the tax counsel in the criminal department has disagreed often with your decisions in the past?
Criminal tax attorneys?
Yes.
And, as I stated in my.
So how often have they disagreed, in your opinion, with your recommendation decisions?
Very often, criminal tax attorneys, yes.
Can you give us a percentage of how often you've said we ought to charge someone and they've said, no, that may not be a good idea?
Yeah, I would say, just ballparking, a vast majority of what we do. And that's why they're advisory. And
do you have respect for them?
And they're advisory.
Do you have respect for them?
Most prosecutors
It's a simple question, sir. Do you respect those colleagues or not?
Often their opinion is not respected by me.
Do you respect them?
Prosecutors?
So do you have more respect for them or Mr. Weiss?
I don't.
I just think because you have a history of wanting to charge people and then people pushing back. By your own testimony under oath, you said about 90% of the time people are pushing back on what you want to do. And I'm not questioning. You are a stickler for the law. It reminds me of Les Mis, and the famous person wanted to get the person who had a sandwich. And then all those times you've got people pushing back on you, and you say, well, they're not very well respected.
Yeah. Well,
do you respect Mr. Weiss?
So the criminal tax attorneys, I've never had a case that they declined, that they did not concur with, that we didn't ignore their request and move forward with the, whether.
But at 90%, they have disagreed with you, correct? By your own testimony.
Yeah, yes, I established that, but they're
And let me
advisory.
just ask you on the media, you've given testimony under oath that you have never spoken to the Washington Post, any report on this matter, correct?
That's correct.
Do you know, have you spoken to any media outlet on this matter?
I have spoken after the House Ways and Means Committee.
Before that,
released
have you
testimony.
spoken to any media journalist on this matter?
Absolutely not.
Do you know of any colleague of yours at the IRS who has spoken to any journalist on this matter?
Absolutely not.
Do you know of any investigation into the leaks on this matter?
So the October 6th leak, I was the person who referred it to our Inspector General. There was
Do you know
also
any of your
a
colleagues who
leak
are under?
on
in-
December 9th of 2020, around the day of action.
Do you know if any of
that I
your
know
colleagues are
that
under
the IRS Inspector
investigation?
General and
Sorry, if I could
DOJ IG
just
was looking
finish.
into.
Do you know if any of your colleagues are under investigation for that leak?
No, I know of no colleague under investigation for that leak.
And just for the record, then it is your testimony under oath that you have never spoken to any media person before the House testimony about this matter.
It's not only my testimony under oath today. I provided an affidavit at House Ways and Means Committee stating the same. I've said it to our Inspector General's office as well.
I appreciate
I
that.
also
I just
said
want to
it,
make a final point
to
on
House
this.
Ways
I
and
mean,
Means
one,
Committee.
I think what,
Mr. Chairman, we mind if I?
Yeah, can the gentleman answer the question you asked, Mr.
I
Carter?
just don't want my time to be affected.
If you're granting him the time, Mr. Chairman, but that's
You give
unusual.
me,
I've never
I
seen
want a
that.
minute to wrap up. If you
Okay.
want to give him.
Okay, you have a minute.
Okay.
Um,
Here's the point. I think this whole thing, our ranking member Raskin summarized this. I don't disrespect you, sir. I think you have a tough view on what you think the law should be. And this is why we have a prosecutorial system where you don't get to decide. I don't get to decide. We have a whole system. And it turns out that often your recommendations on who should be charged differ from some of the other folks. And that's what's happened in this case. And as your testimony here, you yourself said, you think Mr. Weiss should come and explain his decision. You don't question him. And I think on the optics issue that some of my colleagues have brought up, I mean, obviously, Attorney General Barr is going to be concerned with the optics when you have a Donald Trump appointed U.S. attorney potentially bringing charges against his rival's son. That's a real legitimate thing to do. So I guess my view here is we're spending hours on a disagreement about whether to charge someone. We have a whole democratic process that does that. You don't get to my final question, Mr. Shapley, do you think you should decide who gets charged, or do you think that should be the charging officer?
So each time you say this is a disagreement, you can say it multiple times. It doesn't make it true. We've testified under oath here about the prosecutors agreeing with charging felony charges on multiple occasions. And just to say this is a disagreement would be a misrepresentation.
My last question, though, who do you think gets to? Do you think you should have that final decision, or a prosecutor should have the final decision?
No, I am a special agent for IRS criminal investigation. I do not make the final decision on whether to charge or not.
Appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman, may I have a second?
Yes.
So
Yes.
in terms of our criminal tax.
Point of
return-
order, Mr. Chairman, just, are we instituting a new rule in the committee? Because
Well,
I've never
I-
seen this happen before.
Okay. I
so-
didn't know if it was to answer, Mr. Are you finished?
Someone else
Kind of-
can follow
okay.
up. I've
All right,
seen someone
okay.
could say.
Yeah,
give them the
You're
extra time.
correct, rules.
Yep.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair now recognizes Ms. Green for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we begin, I would like to let the committee and everyone watching at home that parental discretion is advised. I would also like to remind everyone that on our oversight committee, we provide oversight into all parts of the federal government, including their Department of Justice and their willingness to prosecute and their unwillingness to prosecute, and whether it's politically motivated. I would also like to say that when evidence and proof of a crime is presented, no prosecution should be denied, no matter who the person is. To the whistleblowers today, I thank both of you for your courage to come to the committee today and your commitment to truth. I have great respect for it, so thank you. I would like to talk with you both about Hunter Biden and his tax write-offs with his law firm, Owasco. I would like to ask Mr. Ziegler, when did you start your investigation? In your testimony, it was November 2018. Is that correct? Yes or no?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. During your testimony with the House Ways and Means Committee, you stated that through bank records, you identified Hunter Biden was paying prostitutes related to a potential prostitution ring. Is that correct? Yes or no?
Yes, that's correct.
I've also reviewed those same bank reports, commonly referred to as SARS, Suspicious Activity Reports, and I'm very troubled by them. We read thousands of them in the Treasury. This particular excerpt from a SARS report talks about human trafficking and in regards to Hunter Biden and Owasco and payments he was making. What's even more troubling to me is that the Department of Justice has brought no charges against Hunter Biden that will vindicate the rights of these women who are clearly victims under the law. I would like to talk about in your prior testimony, you stated that the prosecutorial team was investigating violations of the Mann Act. Is that correct, Mr. Ziegler?
That is correct.
Regarding the Mann Act, if a person is transported across state lines for sexual activity, such as prostitution, that could be a violation of a federal law. Is that correct?
I actually recently looked at the federal law regarding Mann Act, and I believe that that is correct, but I would refer you to the DOJ manual.
Thank you. I would like to present this to the committee. This is showing Hunter Biden paying for a victim's United flight from LA to Dulles. I believe this is a violation of the Mann Act. This is Hunter Biden's, this is his proof that he bought the ticket. He bought it for this woman right here. He flew her from Los Angeles to Washington on June 14th, flew her back to Los Angeles, California on June 15th of 2018. And I would like to point out that if he was purchasing her a plane ticket for sex and traveling across state lines, do you believe that to be a violation of the Mann Act, Mr. Ziegler?
So I can talk to specifically what's in my transcript regarding the Mann Act. So I know we were compiling the information together.
Yes, but Mr. Ziegler, travel as the law states, by the code of the law, it states traveling, paying someone to go across state lines is prostitution. It's a violation of the Mann Act. Let me just move on just one more second here. So when Hunter Biden paid for this woman to do this with him, to travel across state lines from California to Washington, D.C. on June 15th, this is a violation of the Mann Act. This was prostitution. Let me continue. Did Hunter Biden also use his company, Owasco PC, to pay prostitutes?
Can you hold on one second?
Chairman?
Yeah, we'll give you this additional time back.
Thank you.
That was.
So regarding Mann Act violations, what we can do is, given by the statute, we can turn those over to the House Ways and Means Committee, and then we can they can decide to vote to turn them over to you regarding Mann Act.
Thank you, Mr. Ziegler. So talking about Hunter Biden using his company, Owasco PC, to pay prostitutes, this is also a suspicious activity report showing that victim one, the woman that was paid for prostitution, that traveled from California to Washington, D.C., paid for by Hunter Biden. This is an excerpt from a SARS report that we've read in the Treasury, and I think you all have looked at these too, showing that victim one was supposedly an employee of Owasco. But I would like to point out, this is not really what most paralegals do for law firms. And it's very serious that Hunter Biden was paying this woman through his law firm and then writing it off as business tax exemptions. Most people write off, write off things for their taxes through their businesses, like a meal or say office supplies. But can you confirm for me that Hunter Biden had written off payments to prostitutes through his law firm, Owasco?
I appreciate the question given by the statute. I'm limited in my testimony today, and I respectfully would need to turn those records over to the House Ways and Means Committee.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ziegler. One last question. You referred to one of the assistants as West Coast Assistant. I believe this is the West Coast Assistant. Could you agree with that?
So I can tell you that there were deductions for what we believe to be escorts, and then that $10,000 golf club membership. Yes, that was not a golf club membership. That was for a sex club payment.
That was for a sex club payment. Payments such as this from Hunter Biden to prostitutes. Also, Mr. Shapley.
Come on.
Mr. Chairman, we're 1 minute and 53 seconds over. As long as Ms. Ocasio-Cortez can get equal time, she can
Ms.
keep going.
I will let Ms. Green wrap up 5 seconds, and then I'll give Mr. Mafume additional time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Shapley, you started an investigation into Hunter Biden, codenamed Sportsman, which opened in November of 2018. It was an offshoot of an investigation the IRS was conducting into a foreign-based amateur online pornography platform. This is evidence
Chairman,
of Hunter Biden
Chairman,
making
sex.
Excuse me, this is my time.
Unbecoming of
Making pornography.
Should we be displaying this, Mr. Chairman, in the committee?
Gentle lady's time has expired and went 2.5 minutes over.
Chairman,
If
can I
Mr.
have a point of
Mafume
order?
wants the 2.5 minutes, he can have it. If he wants to yield some to Ms. Ocasio-Cortez when she goes, she can have it. We'll make it right. 2.5 minutes. You all
Mr.
have an
Chairman.
extra 2.5 minutes. Chair recognizes Mr.
Mr.
Mafume
Chairman,
for
point
5
of order.
minutes.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. Is that
State your
here?
point.
My understanding is that this committee was provided the suspicious activity reports on the condition that it not publicize them, for the reason that they are not actually even allegations, much less evidence of anything. And my colleague from Georgia has now just revealed it publicly.
That is a good point. However, that suspicious activity report has been public for years. That suspicious activity report was on the internet long before I became chairman of this committee. So that particular suspicious activity report has already been publicized.
Thank you for that clarification. She had said it was part of the thousands she reviewed, but I appreciate the clarification.
Public and able that we all reviewed in the Treasury.
Chair's reclaim time. Chair recognizes Mr. Mafume for 5 minutes, and if you want more time, we'll work with you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I am going to claim my 5 minutes and yield the 2.5 additional minutes that you have given me to my colleague from New York, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. I'm glad somebody brought up the word suspicious activity, because that's just what's taking place in this room. Make no mistake about it. And I want to congratulate my colleagues from across the aisle for gathering us here today, almost distracting us from the biggest investigation that is going on right now in our country and in our nation's history, involving the former president and the front runner for the Republican nomination, who is currently facing a 37-count indictment this week, and maybe 2 weeks from now more, and maybe 2 weeks from then more. But we're spending our time talking about Hunter Biden, someone who has already pleaded guilty to not filing his taxes, having a gun charge, and now I hear also paying for prostitution. But let's just remember that there was a case in New York not too long ago where our former president also got into trouble regarding payments and regarding a stripper, and was found guilty of a violation in civil court. Now, there seems to be a lot of hemming and hawing about special treatments. When the president, just a couple of days ago, tried to delay his federal documents trial and requested the U.S. District Judge Aileen Cannon, whom he appointed, to somehow or another consider the fact that he was a candidate, and therefore maybe his trial should be put off until after the election. That seems to me like special treatment if I've ever heard of it before. But I'm grateful that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are taking at least tax evasion very seriously. And I would welcome also a hearing on the former president's history of tax evasion and how long it took to see his tax returns covering 10 years and what was the outcome of that decision. You know, the Trump organization was hit with $1.6 million in Manhattan State Court being convicted of a tax scheme. So let's be real when we talk about this. It's not just Hunter Biden, but as long as we're saying Hunter Biden, we forget everything else. And again, Hunter Biden did step forward and said, I did not file taxes in 2 years. And yes, this gun charge, I will take responsibility for. Now, I love the fact that we are so much in love with the IRS. In fact, Speaker McCarthy said when he was elected on the 15th vote that the first bill that he would repeal funding for was the bill that would provide for 87,000 additional IRS employees. My, don't we love the IRS? We're just going to cut their budget. In fact, there's a member of this committee who on their own website said that they are proud to have voted to strip away the plan to empower the IRS with additional funding. So I'm going to get back to those two words again about keeping it real, and I think we really have to do that. I just think, Mr. Shapley, two quick things. Did Hunter Biden in any way, in your knowledge, not Hunter, but did any of his children receive money, yes or no?
I think Special Agent Ziegler would be better.
Yes or no?
Special Agent Ziegler would be better.
Either one, yes or no?
Congressman, thank you for your question. Given by the statute, I am limited in my testimony that
Okay.
I can give here today, but we can turn over any of the records that relate to the adult children.
Yes, we'd like to
House
see
Ways
those.
and Means Committee.
We'd like to see those. Really, I would, since we are so concerned about tax evasion, and we've got people at the highest levels of government doing it, and we don't want to talk about that at all. Now, here's what galls me. I don't like these attacks on the Department of Justice, the FBI, the IRS, as if they are somehow anti-US agencies. Those agencies keep this democracy in check. It keeps them afloat. They provide the checks and they provide the balances. And we could be, quite frankly, using our
To enforce.
We don't like the attacks coming from the DOJ and the FBI and all them places either, jackass. Sorry for the cuss word. I just got a little upset.
our time to better talk about crime in America that's affecting everybody, attacks on women's health, the economy, budgetary issues, public education, housing, the need for senior citizens to be able to pay for prescription drugs, child poverty, and mental health, to name a few. And yet we are doing this all over again for the Hunter Biden show to someone who has pleaded guilty and has taken responsibility for not filing taxes for 2 years. This is ludicrous. Beam me up, Scotty. There's no intelligent life down here. None. I yield.
Chairman, time's expired. Chair now recognizes Mr. Armstrong from North Dakota.
Well, if I could plead guilty to 2 years of tax evasion when I was accused of 6, I might consider that to be a pretty good plea deal. And let's talk about what this is and what it's supposed to be. Mr. Shapley, I think you were going to testify that IRS criminal tax attorneys are advisory only, and often DOJ prosecutors disagree with the IRS tax attorneys. Is that probably an accurate statement?
Yes, it's an accurate statement.
And I think this is important because everybody continues to go after you two, like you're the only two people who were involved in this. You went to work for the IRS in 2008?
2009, correct?
2009. Mr. Ziegler, 2010?
2010.
So you started under President Obama, continued your career under President Trump, and are continuing your career under President Biden. Is that accurate?
Yes,
That is
that's correct.
accurate.
And in your entire career, excluding today, how many times have you talked about who appointed a U.S. attorney?
I haven't.
In the course of any investigation, have you talked about whether it was a Democratic appointee or a Republican appointee?
I have not, no.
Mr. Ziegler?
I have not.
Because it's not supposed to matter, right? And that's why you have line U.S. attorneys that also go across administrations and work through Republican administrations, Democratic administrations, and that's the part of your investigative team. Now, that investigative team recommended that you charge Hunter Biden for every tax year from 2014 till 2019 and felonies for at least 2014 and 2018. And this included income from Burisma and a scheme to evade taxes through a partnership with a convicted felon. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate.
And the total amount of taxes not paid over that period or not paid timely was over $1.5 million. And that didn't include interest and penalties or other enhancements that are typically involved in this case, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And Mr. Ziegler, your testimony identifies two separate criminal violations, which is an attempt to avoid taxes and filing false tax returns. And they both carry a 6-year statute of limitations.
That is correct.
And Mr. Shapley, you stated that the purposeful exclusion of the 2014 and 2015 tax years sanitized the most substantial criminal conduct and concealed material facts. Can you expound on that a little bit?
So yeah, that statement made to the House Ways and Means Committee was in reference to the income from Burisma that was not reported, and therefore, if it wasn't reported, it wouldn't be on a statement of facts, and it would be completely left off the official record.
And as far as you're aware, that's not part of any plea deal, correct?
I can't speak to the plea deal, but yeah, I don't believe so.
I want to talk about something that is a little unique to this investigation. I want to take you back to December 7th and 8th of 2020. And you were planning your investigative team, right? This is the whole team, East Coast, all across the country. Numerous interviews are going to be conducted. And Hunter Biden was going to be the subject of one of those in LA, correct?
That's correct.
And this is unique because Joe Biden has won the election. We're walking into this, and there are some serious, I mean, if there's Secret Service protectees, I'm assuming you have to contact the Secret Service. You're not walking up with armed FBI agents to a Secret Service protectee.
Yes, we had a plan on how to approach Hunter Biden that day.
Could you briefly explain that plan?
So the FBI SSA and I were assigned with interviewing Hunter Biden that day. And the day previous, we went to the LA FBI field office and asked them to the special agent in charge to contact the Secret Service special agent in charge from the LA field office at 8 a.m. on the morning of December 8th and tell them that two agents were going to approach Hunter Biden as part of an official investigation. And the night before, all of that changed.
And all of that changed because FBI headquarters and Secret Service headquarters coordinated, and that information had gotten out to everybody the night before. And we can talk about whether it's a highly political investigation and all of those different things, but there's another group of people that was made aware of that the night before, wasn't there?
Yeah, that's correct.
And that would be the transition team.
That's correct.
And the transition team is a political operation set up to help the president-elect vet cabinet employees, work on inauguration, do all of those things. I mean, is that your understanding?
Generally, yes.
Do they have any special investigative powers I don't know about?
Not that I would know of.
In your entire history and working in history with the IRS, you ever worked with a transition team of a president to help set up an interview with a subject of a criminal investigation?
I have not.
Last question. Did you ever get to interview Hunter Biden?
We did not interview him.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Ms. Ocasio-Cortez for 5 minutes plus the 2.5 minutes that we went over.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Shapley and Mr. Ziegler. And I want to thank you both for appearing before us today. I understand that this is not easy. And it is very important that both of you are respected during the course of this hearing. Mr. Ziegler, in your deposition to the Ways and Means Committee, I believe you said that that you began this investigation in 2018, correct?
That is correct.
And so some of the events that you discuss in your deposition took place 2, 3, 4 years ago, correct? Over the last several years.
Yeah, that would be correct.
In your deposition in front of the Ways and Means Committee and in your testimony before us today, you have relayed your memory of events that occurred over the course of a nearly 5-year investigation. Mr. Ziegler, when you testified before the Ways and Means Committee, you also testified that you were told that it was then Attorney General William Barr who made the decision to merge the DC and Delaware Hunter Biden investigations, correct?
I did testify to that, correct.
And a few weeks after that testimony, your attorney wrote in a letter to Congress, I quote, Mr. Ziegler is confident he was told by his supervisor that the merging of the cases was at the direction of an official at the Department of Justice. However, on further reflection, Mr. Ziegler cannot definitively state that his then supervisor said that the Department of Justice official directing the merger of the cases was Attorney General Barr, correct?
That is correct. And I can tell you that I actually refreshed my memory from looking at my emails. And there was an email that I found from my supervisor at that time that stated what had happened. And I can turn that over to the House Ways and Means Committee at some point.
And in that updated email, does it include Attorney General Barr or not?
So I can't speak
it
to the
need-
contents
Okay.
of that email, but
No problem. I think in light of the correction, and truly in good faith, these things happen all the time, right? The recollection of these investigations require an extraordinary amount of detail, and the charges of what is being brought forward today are extremely serious, which require a high threshold of evidence, including investigations and depositions. But I hope you'd agree that even the best memory can be fallible at times, and that is the widely understood reality in our justice system. Mr. Shapley, from your testimony today, I think you would agree that it is important that criminal investigations be conducted fairly and free from political influence. That's why we're here today, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, as you stated, and as was kind of discussed with Mr. Khan and with others, there are often disagreements. It seems as though within some of the transcribed interviews that we read, it says, yes, about 90% of the time, there is this IRS reviewing attorneys disagree with the charging decisions of the agents in the group, correct?
That was part of the testimony, not all of it.
In some of your comments, you've also noted that you've made reference to a special counsel in this situation. But I believe what there might be a reference to here is the question of a special attorney, not a special counsel, correct?
So if you're speaking about the October 7th, 2022 email that I documented contemporaneously on that day, that's why I documented it on that day, so that, 9 months later, I'm not trying to recall a specific word. And so it says special counsel authority. That's what he said that day. That's what a senior executive IRS corroborated when he responded to my emails.
And I do think that distinction is important, because in this letter to Chairman Jordan, the issue at hand seems to be a special attorney, not a special counsel, which are two distinct, different legal authorities. And there also may be some confusion, I think, with respect to that as well. Which brings me to the point of political influence. Where there actually is a set of breadcrumbs, however, is in a set of tweets and letters sent from former President Trump to several chairs, to the chair of the House Judiciary Committee that we see here. In fact, according to New York Times article, which I'd like to present to the record today, President Trump's attorney wrote to the Judiciary Committee chairman, urging him to investigate what he called, quote, a rogue local district attorney. And after that New York DA convened a grand jury that ultimately indicted Donald Trump, Chairman Jordan complied with that letter. Shortly after President Trump's attorney sent that letter to the committee, which is highly unusual, a very highly unusual act. And in fact, after that, on March 20th, Chairman Jordan, together with the Committee on House Administration, Chairman Brian Steele, as well as the chairman of this committee, wrote to District Attorney Bragg and then demanded a sweeping series of documents, including communications between the DA's office and the Department of Justice, also highly unusual. In fact, on his Truth Social account later on, Donald Trump claimed that the U.S. attorney investigating Hunter Biden, a U.S. attorney, by the way, that Donald Trump appointed, was, quote, a coward. And then in that, he then urged that maybe the presiding judge will have the courage and intellect to break up this, quote, cesspool of crime. Curiously, just a few days after this tweet, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Jason Smith, sent a letter to U.S. Attorney David Weiss and Attorney General Merrick Garland, who are implicated in this hearing, explicitly asking them to place the whistleblower testimony from the committee's depositions into the court record, which were addressed during the chairman's opening statements before Hunter Biden's plea hearing at the end of the month. And as you can see right here, Chairman Smith explicitly said, and I quote, entering this information into the formal record. Additionally, those two chairmen waived onto this hearing today. Highly unusual.
Will the gentlelady yield?
And one moment. And when we talk about political influence, we are not here today, unfortunately, because the facts have brought us here. We are here today because Donald Trump is exerting an influence campaign in Congress when he is no longer president of the United States. In addition to that, if we want to talk about charges that have been dismissed, and if we do want to follow the evidence, perhaps we should discuss Ivanka Trump's investigation who was close to being charged with felony fraud after Donald Trump's personal attorney provided political contributions to the local DA. Those charges were dismissed, and ultimately we saw that DA Vance, President Trump's attorney, provided over $50,000 in political contributions after the case was dismissed. So when we talk about political contributions, I would hope, if we are following the evidence, that we are willing, that this committee, if this committee is going to go there, that they be willing to open investigations into the dismissal of charges against Ivanka Trump. And by the way, if the gentlelady from Georgia wanted to follow evidence, we should also take a look at, hypothetically, a case where sex trafficking charges against a 17-year-old girl potentially.
The gentlelady's time's expired.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Gosar of Arizona for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, Chairman Comer and his team have done an outstanding job of uncovering the millions of dollars sent to Hunter Biden from foreign sources located in places like China, Romania, and Ukraine. It's pretty obvious that the Hunter Biden's only avenue for making money is the influence over his father. Now, the only thing missing is direct evidence that Joe Biden knew and participated in these bribery schemes. That is where you brave men have come in. Their investigative efforts have the potential to uncover direct evidence in a paid play, and in some cases, it did. Yet they're very hindered from doing their jobs by the Department of Justice deep state. As Mr. Shapley put it, quote, at every stage, decisions were made to benefit the subject of this investigation, end of quote. That's Hunter Biden and, by extension, Joe Biden. Now, these men are not political people. They're hardworking agents. The last thing they want to do is speculate. So I'm going to stick to confirming the most egregious examples of the DOJ's prosecutorial misconduct, abuse, and favoritism detailed in their testimonies, and leave it up to the American people to draw their own conclusion. Mr. Shapley, under U.S. tax law, taxes owed on all income received from legal and legal sources, right?
Yes, yeah.
Hypothetically, if a person is subject to U.S. taxes receives $1 million for serving as a director for, let's say, an oil company, they would owe taxes on that $1 million, perhaps as much as 38%, correct?
If they're a U.S. taxpayer, yes.
Failure to declare the receipt of such income violates U.S. tax code, correct?
Yes, it would.
Failing to timely pay the tax owed is in whatever amount violates the tax code, correct?
Yes, it does.
And the tax code has criminal and civil penalties for these violations, correct?
That is correct.
So now, hypothetically, if a person receives $1 million payment and then conveys 10% of that amount to another person, that person making that payment may have to pay a gift tax on that amount, correct?
Yeah. If they say it's a gift, yes.
Yeah. Or conversely, the person receiving the money has to pay income tax on the money as well, correct?
If on the gift portion or on
Yes.
the income portion?
No,
So
on the gift.
they would have to report the gift on their tax returns, but I don't believe it'd be taxable to them.
And then the failure to do is subject to criminal or civil penalties, correct?
Filing false tax returns is against the law, yes.
Yeah. Now, is there definite confirmation that all evidence on the Hunter Biden laptop has been reviewed by federal agents and prosecutors?
The prosecutor stated that evidence was withheld from the investigators. We don't know how much.
Did DOJ prosecutors allow your team to access the laptop?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, did the DOJ prosecutors allow your team to access the laptop?
The
DOJ prosecutors.
So when the laptop comes in, there are computer investigative specialists that review the laptop, and they create reports and pull stuff from.
And you were prohibited from looking at anything on the laptop, right?
We saw some, but not all.
Okay, gotcha. Is it normal for the DOJ to deny this type of access to investigators?
No, that's the first time I've experienced being limited to evidence.
Did Assistant Attorney Wolf collaborate with the data on the laptop?
Did she
Collaborate the data.
corroborate? I wouldn't know.
Okay. Now, I guess my question comes back, and the reason I went down this rabbit hole is it your conclusion that you were interfered with, and that those that interfered with you are as guilty as those creating the problem? Are they accessories to a crime? Is what I'm getting to.
Well, I would agree that there were investigative steps that were definitely obstructed by DOJ that I'd never seen in my 14 years, and just honestly just makes no sense. We wouldn't want to collect all of the evidence available. I can't opine on the second part of your question.
Gotcha. Mr. Ziegler, did the DOJ prosecutors deny your request to look into the famous, quote, "I am sitting here with my father," text from Hunter Biden? Did they allow you to obtain location information to see where the text was sent from?
So I know it was an issue that came up, whether we can get the location data, and I know that was a conversation that I would have had with the assigned prosecutors. I recall them saying to me that, how do we know that he's there? How do we know that that's true, the statement that's being made there? And then I said, well, we would get the location data. So as a part of my normal investigation, that's what I would do. And what I can tell you is I know I didn't do it. I don't know if the FBI ever ended up doing it. It was kind of like a let's wait or I need to think about it, I guess is the proper response.
Gotcha. My time is up. I yield back.
Gentlemen's time's expired. Chair now recognizes Ms. Brown. It looks like your name. Ms. Brown, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The American people have lost track of your supposed investigation of President Biden, or is it an investigation of his son, who does not and has never worked at the White House, or another family member? We can't even follow which investigation we're discussing today. Is it the FBI, the IRS, XXX, or something new? I know the American people are confused because we're all confused what we're doing here. Nothing this majority has claimed about the president or his family has merit. No wonder the folks back home are tuning out of this confused mess. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle have shredded all their credibility in this committee. They simply grasp at straws that do not exist. In this Congress so far, we've held more hearings on gas stoves than gun violence, and culture wars than kitchen table issues. So let's talk about the real two-tier justice system, the one in which big corporations pollute the air we breathe, and the big banks cause meltdowns with their negligence, and not one person is held criminally liable. They're certainly not called by the majority to sit before this committee. Or, Mr. Chairman, what if we talked about the other unspoken two-tier justice system in this country, the one where people of color are subject to a deliberately harsher system at every turn, from policing to prison to parole? In this country, a Black person is 5 times more likely to be stopped without due cause than a white person. And Black defendants are 25% more likely to be held pre-trial. Meanwhile, the twice indicted former president is out campaigning around the country and didn't even have to post bail. Yet hundreds of thousands of Americans sit behind bars waiting for their day in court. These are the types of lived experiences we should be addressing in this oversight committee. This is the real two-tiered justice system, and it's the justice system Democrats are trying to fix after 4 years of Donald Trump's misuse. Congressional Republicans, however, are working to make these inequalities worse through their efforts to defund the IRS and other Democratic priorities included in the Inflation Reduction Act. So since my colleagues claim to want stricter IRS enforcement, you would think we would at least agree on giving the IRS its proper funding. So let me conclude by asking a simple question, Mr. Shapley, yes or no? Do you know the rate at which Black taxpayers are audited as compared to taxpayers who are not Black?
No, I don't know.
Well, the answer is Black taxpayers are audited at 2.9 to 4.7 times the rate of non-Black taxpayers. Another question for you, sir. Yes or no? Will this hearing help alleviate the racial disparity in the rates of the IRS audits? No.
That's not the topic. of
Thank
this
you. And with that,
I move the gentleman yield.
I will yield the balance of my time to the ranking member.
No, thank you kindly and for your excellent questioning and statement there. The chairman of the Judiciary Committee, when he was here, invited us to believe that the U.S. Attorney for Delaware had changed his tune or changed his story. But when you look at the letters he actually sent, he didn't change his tune at all. He said the exact same thing every time and even expanded the answer to be perfectly clear. In his June 7th letter, he says, I've been granted ultimate authority over this matter, including responsibility for deciding where, when, and whether to file charges and for making decisions necessary to preserve the integrity of the prosecution consistent with federal law, the principles of federal prosecution, and departmental regulations. In other words, it's up to him. It's up to the U.S. Attorney. Then, in June 30, the letter to Chairman Jordan, he says, second, in my June 7th letter, I stated, quote, I have been granted ultimate authority over this matter, including responsibility for deciding where, when, and whether to file charges, etc. Unquote. I stand by what I wrote and wish to expand on what this means. And this gets to the heart, I think, of what we're doing here today. As the U.S. Attorney for the District of Delaware, my charging authority is geographically limited to my home district. If venue for a case lies elsewhere, common departmental practice is to contact the U.S. Attorney's Office for the district in question and determine whether it wants to partner on the case. If not, I may request special attorney status from the Attorney General pursuant to 28 U.S.C. 515. Here I've been assured that if necessary, I would be granted Section 515 authority in the District of Columbia, the Central District of California, or any other district where charges could be brought in this matter. Okay, and it is the difference, as Ms. Ocasio-Cortez was saying, between special counsel and special attorney, which might explain the confusion or the disagreement here. In any event, the U.S. Attorney for Delaware had all of the authority he needed to bring whatever charges he wanted, wherever he wanted, and he is the witness for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll yield back to the gentleman.
I would like to be clear that he was assured that authority. He was
Yes, he
assured
was,
that
and he said he was assured the authority.
And he is limited within Delaware.
Well,
The
right, but that's
charges
just the
weren't in
rules.
Delaware.
You're just restating what the rules are. That's what he explained. You're not a lawyer, right? You don't work in the Department of Justice, correct? He's explaining what the rules are.
Gentlemen's time's expired.
Okay.
Chair recognizes Dr. Fox from North Carolina for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Shapley, Mr. Ziegler, thank you for being here today. Blowing the whistle against a man as well connected as Hunter Biden is a truly courageous act, and I hope that all of my colleagues can appreciate that as well. Mr. Shapley, I'd like to start with a simple question. When did you start your career as an investigator with the IRS?
In July of 2009.
Thank you. And in what year were you promoted to a supervisory role?
In 2018.
So that's 14 years of service at the IRS, with 5 of those years in a senior leadership position, correct?
That's correct.
Did you ever, in your 14 years of experience, see an investigation be handled in the same manner as the one we're here to discuss today, the one into Hunter Biden's taxes?
I have not, no.
And when were you made supervisor of the investigation in Mr. Biden's Operation Sportsman?
In January of 2020.
By your estimate at that time, when did you initially believe that the evidence was sufficient to request physical search warrants in California, Arkansas, New York, and Washington, D.C.?
So Special Agent Ziegler drafted an affidavit in April or May, and that was when for the search warrant.
Of 2020?
Of 2020, yes, I'm sorry.
And it was a short time after that you began to suspect that career officials at DOJ were, quote, dragging their feet regarding the next steps in the investigation. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And 2 months later, in June of 2020, you came to the belief, expressing as such in communications with the IRS CL leadership, that if normal procedures had been followed, that these search warrants would have already been executed. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Was this within the typical time frame for the self-imposed investigative pause that DOJ historically tends to implement in cases preceding elections?
It was not. The official Department of Justice Public Integrity stand down came on September 4th of 2020.
After the initial steps were inexplicably denied, prosecutors continued to decline to advance on promising leads. There were, for example, many problematic text messages and emails on the infamous laptop in August 2020. When were you informed by Assistant U.S. Attorney Wolf that the DOJ would not allow physical search warrant on Hunter Biden?
So I don't recall the exact date. Do you?
And I don't think that that's in the confines of our testimony, but we can provide that information to the House Ways and Means Committee, a clarification to that, and then that can clarify that issue.
My understanding is that it was October 2020, but we appreciate your clarification of that. Did Assistant U.S. Secretary Wolf's decision not to execute a search warrant on Hunter Biden strike you as atypical, Mr. Shapley?
Generally, in any other investigation, if we have probable cause and we believe there's evidence in that location that could help prove our violations, then we would execute that search warrant.
So it was an unusual action.
Yes, Congresswoman.
Thank you. Is it fair to conclude that this pattern of odd, atypical, and sometimes bewildering actions taken by DOJ Tax and the District Attorney's Office happened over the course of the entire investigation and not just one or two occurrences?
That's correct, and it was the pattern that really drove me to one of the things that drove me to come forward of that deviation from a normal investigative processes.
In your opinion, did these odd, atypical, and bewildering actions bolster or harm the investigation?
I believe they hurt the investigation.
To our chairman, I would say that there's something rotten in the state of Delaware, and that what has happened here with Hunter Biden would not have happened to other Americans. And this is totally unfair. And I think it's very important that we get to the bottom of this investigation and find out who has been obstructing this sense of justice. The American people demand justice, and this committee demands justice along with the other committees involved. And I thank you for this hearing. Thank our witnesses.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Chair now recognizes Ms. Stansberry from New Mexico for 5.
Thank you. I'd like to get right into some basic vetting questions, as unfortunately our colleagues across the aisle failed to do so with some of the previous witnesses that they called. And so, Mr. Ziegler and Mr. Shapley, I'm hoping that these are very simple, very straightforward questions. So I'd like to ask that you answer them with a yes or no answer. Mr. Shapley, are you now or have you ever acted as an unregistered foreign agent for the Chinese government or for any other government?
No.
And Mr. Ziegler, are you now or have you ever acted as an unregistered or registered foreign agent?
No.
And Mr. Shapley, have you ever participated in illegal arms trafficking?
No, I have not.
And Mr. Ziegler, how about yourself?
I have not.
And finally, Mr. Shapley, have you ever been indicted of a crime, lied to investigators while under oath, or run from the law?
No, I have not.
And Mr. Ziegler, same question to you. Have you ever been indicted, lied to investigators, or run from the law?
I have not.
Thank you for answering those questions. Obviously, it would seem strange to have to ask these clarifying questions, but given the majority's track record in calling witnesses on this matter, not to mention their own presidential candidate, it seemed necessary to clarify for our American folks who are listening today. So let's get into the kinds of crimes that the majority claims that they're interested in investigating here in the Oversight Committee, namely political influence, abuse of power, and other alleged crimes by a president and their relations. And again, because our time is limited, I'd like to ask our witnesses to stick with very simple, straightforward yes and no answers. Now, Mr. Ziegler, you are aware that Mr. Jared Kushner received a $2 billion investment from the Saudi government after working for his father-in-law at the White House, correct?
Congressman, I thank you for the question. I'm here to talk about the Hunter Biden investigation.
It is a widely known fact, and I appreciate your response. Mr. Ziegler, you are aware that while serving as a senior advisor to her father, Ivanka Trump had a number of trademarks fast-tracked by the Chinese government, correct?
Again, I have to stick to the confines of my transcript.
I
so-
appreciate that. And finally, I want to remind everyone that the person who appointed U.S. Attorney General David Weiss to handle the matter that we're here to discuss today was Donald Trump. But this would be the same president, Donald Trump, the man twice impeached for abuses of power, and of course, recently indicted for 37 counts of criminal activity. Now, one would think that here in the Oversight Committee, we would want to investigate such blatant acts of criminal activity. And I truly could not agree more with our witness, Mr. Shapley, that there should not be a two-tiered system of justice for those who are powerful and those who are wealthy and those who are not. But that is not actually what this hearing is about here today, because it's clear that this is yet another attempt by the majority to turn this committee into another in-kind donation to the Trump campaign. Now, this follows on an earlier attempt this past month to undermine the FBI with a controversial markup, which thankfully did not occur, the very same day that Donald Trump was indicted under those 37 counts. In fact, if you look across the aisle, we have 13 members who have already endorsed Donald Trump. And now here we are trying to distract the American people once more, even though it was a political appointee appointed by Donald Trump, who was at the helm of this effort when the issues we are discussing today occurred. And yet we're using the committee's resources to advance this agenda. But I think it's important that the American people actually understand that the real criminal and the actual threat to our democratic institutions is Donald Trump. The man found legally liable for sexual abuse, the man who refused to return classified documents to the government, the man who was inciting an insurrection that led to the deaths of 5 people and threatened the lives of people in this very room, and who threatened the very foundation of our democracy. So I find it hard to believe that members who witnessed the insurrection, who have witnessed these criminal indictments, continue to stand here today with Donald Trump and prop him up using committee resources. And I urge my colleagues to take a hard look in the mirror and to really reflect on what our oath of office means. And with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. Chair now recognizes Mr. Higgins from Louisiana for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Shapley, Mr. Ziegler. We're going to be moving fast here. Let me make a statement to begin. Let's just clarify for America. Republicans are only interested in Hunter Biden's deceptions regarding his IRS confirmed receipt of $17.3 million from shady sources in Ukraine and Romania and China while his father was vice president because Hunter Biden had nothing to sell. He had no product, no service, no skill. All Hunter Biden had to sell was corrupted access to his father, the big guy. How dare Congressman Higgins call the President of the United States, may I say the inaugurated President of the United States, how we call him the big guy? Let's go. December 30th, 2020. This investigator Shapley and investigator Ziegler, IRS criminal investigation team, had a 12-hour-long meeting with U.S. Attorney's Office in Delaware. The prosecution team, Wolf and Weiss, are in attendance. Shapley shares an IRS plan to interview Biden associate Rob Walker. Wolf objects to this plan to the dismay of those in the room. But, she said, we do not want to ask about the big guy, and stated she did not want to ask about Dad. December 8, 2020, Investigator Shapley, Investigator Ziegler, meeting with Special Agent Joe Gordon, received a call from Hunter Biden's attorneys stating that they would accept service for document requests but declined requests for the interview. The IRS investigators were only able to conduct one meaningful interview, that with Biden associate Rob Walker. That day, investigations revealed to the press, December 9th, 2020. Wolf gets involved again to interrupt the investigation. December 14th, 2020. Assistant U.S. Attorney Wolf tips off Biden counsel about an IRS plan. They had reached the threshold of probable cause to execute a search warrant on a storage unit in Northern Virginia. U.S. Attorney Wolf calls Hunter Biden's attorney and alerts him to the pending search warrant being executed. You stated, Investigator Shapley, that at every stage during your investigation, decisions were made that benefited the subject of the investigation. Who was the subject of the investigation, good sir?
Hunter Biden.
Thank you very much. And I think I clarified for America why we were interested in Hunter Biden. Because he sold access to his father, the big guy. And you Americans out there may have a compromised president in your White House. You should certainly be concerned. Mr. Ziegler, how did the IRS investigation regarding Hunter Biden begin? Tell us briefly, sir.
It was a review of bank records regarding another investigation I was working.
So it was ancillary to another criminal investigation. Is that correct, sir?
Correct.
And you are a criminal investigator. Is that correct, sir?
That is correct.
Not civil.
That is correct.
Thank you very much. Investigator Shapley, in a September 3rd, 2020 meeting with the prosecution team for the Hunter Biden case, Assistant U.S. Attorney Leslie Wolf told your team there was more than enough probable cause for the physical search warrant of the guest house at then former Vice President's Delaware residence where Hunter Biden stayed for a time. Did U.S. Attorney Leslie Wolf confirm your investigative effort that you had sufficient probable cause for search?
Yes, she did.
Thank you very much. But you've told Congress that Assistant U.S. Attorney Wolf also said that the question was whether the juice was worth the squeeze. That's a quote. And that optics were a driving factor in the decision on whether to execute a search warrant. Optics? Have you ever run into that, Mr. Shapley?
I have not, no.
Have you, Mr. Ziegler?
I have not.
Now, why do you think the Department of Justice might be concerned about optics in the search of the president's son's residence during the course of a criminal investigation? Mr. Shapley?
I mean, just the sensitivities involved with that search warrant, and it would, you know.
It's pretty clear, isn't it?
Yep.
There's another search warrant I'm going to touch on in my remaining section. I'm going to have my time expired here. Let me just say, gentlemen, you're courageous for coming forward. And let me ask you, did your job begin with an oath?
It did.
Have you upheld that oath?
Yes, I have.
And is it your core principles that have driven you to reveal the corruptions that you've witnessed in your criminal investigations coming before Congress today?
Yes, it was.
Yes, it was.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Very good. Chair now recognizes Mr. Gomez for 5 minutes. Garcia for 5 minutes. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So let's first zero in on the bottom line. What we have is two IRS investigators who clearly worked very hard on the Hunter Biden investigation, and thank you both for being here today. You both gave recommendations to prosecutors based on your work, which you've described today. And then Donald Trump's hand-picked prosecutor then made recommendations to charge Hunter. He acted independently, and he himself has confirmed this. You did your job making recommendations, and then the prosecutor did his job. You don't have to agree with his conclusions, but that's the bottom line of what we have today at this hearing. But today's hearing is like most of the majority's investigations and hearings. A lot of allegations, zero proof, no receipts, but apparently some dick pics. Now, at a certain point, the American people will need some actual evidence. Actual evidence. But we've seen absolutely none. So let's go back and review what's gone over the course of the last 7 months of this smear campaign against the White House. First, the committee is clearly obsessed with Hunter Biden, massively obsessed with him. Now, keep in mind, there's been no evidence of any wrongdoing or transactions of the person that's actually in government, Joe Biden. A lot about Hunter, not a lot about Joe Biden. And Hunter Biden, I want to remind the majority, is actually not the president of the United States. And I want to point out that no Biden family members hold government positions of any kind. Now, this is, of course, in stark contrast to the Trump crime family. The majority conveniently glazes over the Trump's family's foreign dealings. The Trump family, who, of course, were actually appointed to White House senior jobs, from Ivanka's Chinese trademarks to Jared's Qatari real estate bailout and $2 billion in Saudi private equity money. So where's that investigation? They were actually in the White House. And I think Chris Christie, one of the Republicans running for president, said it best, of course, in the former governor. This is his quote, not mine. The grift from the family is breathtaking. It's breathtaking. Jared Kushner and Ivanka Kushner walk out of the White House and months later get $2 billion from the Saudis. Continue. You think it's because it's some kind of investigative genius or investing genius? Or is it because he was sitting next to the president of the United States for 4 years and doing favors for the Saudis? Now, these are quotes from a man who's known Trump and the Kushners for years. These people are in the White House every day, formally making policy, unlike Hunter Biden. Now, the Biden family attacks, of course, went nowhere. And so they tried, of course, to create a new storm, a new conspiracy theory with the so-called FBI Ukraine document, another fake scandal. This new fake scandal had a lot of hype, a lot of scary headlines from our chairman, from a lot of members of this committee, but a lot of us actually read the document. And when you read the document, it was pretty clear this was all hype. Just a wild accusation being passed along to the FBI with zero proof. And where did this accusation actually come from? Rudy Giuliani. Just another Rudy Giuliani tinfoil hat conspiracy theory that went nowhere. Giuliani recommended that Rudy Giuliani, by the way, whose law license is being recommended to actually be removed. Now, Rudy Giuliani's longtime associate, Lev Parnas, just said that he's prepared to testify under oath that there is no evidence that the president or his son Hunter interfered with Ukrainian politics, and there never has been. The Republican U.S. Attorney Scott Brady, handpicked by Donald Trump, determined it did not have sufficient evidence to further investigate Rudy's claims. But members of this committee, even today, repeat this narrative over and over again. More accusations, no proof, no receipts. So what's next in the switch hunt? This man, Gal Luft. The Republicans were so desperate just last week to find someone who could tell them what they wanted to hear that they promoted and collaborated with a Chinese spy trying to influence U.S. policy while selling weapons to Iran and Libya. So why is the so-called whistleblower missing? We don't know. Skipped his bail, being searched upon after being arrested. Now we're so desperate to cling to this narrative, they're defending this alleged crook. I want to know, we have questions. Was the chairman, was the committee staff in contact with Mr. Luft while he was a fugitive? Do we know where he is? What vetting does the majority do to make sure that there aren't targets of foreign influence on this committee? These are the real questions that we need answers.
If you're willing to yield, I'll answer that question.
Sure, I just want my time.
I've never met Gal Luft in my life. All I know is he was getting money from the same company that the Bidens were getting money from, CEFC. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking forward to also if anyone from the committee or any committee members or committee staff had any contact with who is now obviously a Chinese spy, which you and the committee have been hyping up for weeks.
Well, is the
So-
president's son a Chinese spy? They took money from the only difference
What
is
does
the president's
taking
son
money
took a
from the
hell of a
same
lot more money
company
than
mean?
Gal Luft did.
Sir, Mr. Chairman, you were the one hyping up a Chinese spy and arms dealer for weeks. This is just another
Who
example.
cares if they
of
had
bringing it
money
up.
from the same company?
So just to finish up my time, let me just say that it's clear to me that this majority will stop at nothing to try to impeach President Biden, the Attorney General, Secretary Mayorkas, and the list goes on and on. This is just another witch hunt that the majority continues to do week after week. The majority is trying to interfere in ongoing legal proceedings to cause chaos and to try to reelect Donald Trump, who obviously is pulling this extremist agenda. I yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Sessions from Texas for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Gentlemen, welcome, and thank you very much for taking time. We've been sitting here listening and strongly identify that both of you have chosen to do this as strong people who have an ethical and moral idea about your service to this country. We want to thank you. Today, we have examples of the Department of Justice and the IRS that have not just given special treatment to those who committed tax evasion and financial fraud with the president's family, but I think there's another point that we would want to make today. And that is that I believe that a taxpayer system where the agency is tasked with enforcing the laws fairly on regular citizens is also seeking the chance to shield those well-connected to the President of the United States from consequences of illegal behavior in direct opposition to our nation's founding principles. We've established that. I think that's pretty clear what you've said today. But I have a question for both of you because I believe today's hearing goes beyond that. And that is that there are strong whistleblower protections under 5 CUSC Section 2302, the Whistleblower Protection Act, that afford you and any other person who works in this government the protection from retaliation after making a legally protected disclosure. In doing your job, you felt like there was something wrong, you said something about it, and you filed for whistleblower status because you believed that something was being held against you. In fact, both of you had made several legally protected disclosures during this time for the record. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That is correct.
So after making this disclosure to the committee, did the IRS comply with the statutorily required whistleblower protections? How were you treated in this endeavor?
So I'll start. So since I made these protected disclosures that are legally protected, the IRS has chosen to retaliate against me in multiple ways. Even now, there's major case initiatives that actually Special Agent Ziegler started as well that are now being put on the back burner and just being slow walked. Again, there's my immediate supervisor and 2 levels above them haven't spoken to me since June 1st of 2023. Even though I'm sending them emails and trying to conduct my business on a daily basis, they literally have not spoken to me. There's
Would that
things-
be normal?
No, absolutely not. I mean, we're running undercover operations. We're doing interviews across the world, and it really becomes when senior leadership really cuts off communication like that, it increases the chance of some officer safety type issue when we can't communicate those type of issues with senior leadership and we have no support from them.
Absolutely. Mr. Ziegler?
To be completely honest with you, this is going to make me a little bit emotional, but like,
And I'm sorry because I know this is personal. You spoke about that in your opening statement.
never have I thought that it's essentially like being left out on an island, and I don't know if that's done purposefully, but I essentially made disclosures up to the commissioner of the IRS. I said what happened, and the response I got a few days later was, I may have broken the law, and don't ever do this again. Your emails need to go through your leadership. So to have that come to me was chilling. It was, I can't even put words to it. But what I can say is there are some people within my agency, some people in leadership that have been a person that I can go to for support, but the vast majority of it has just, it's the impact on the person. It's awful.
Well, retaliation is many times seen by people who know it when they see it. And that is why the law exists. And I want both of you to know, as Chairman of Government Operations Subcommittee for this committee, Government Reform and Oversight, Government Accountability, I will be coming to the IRS and I will be going to other agencies specifically about their retaliation under the law within their agencies that we should take as a committee, a whole committee and a subcommittee, very seriously, because this could be a number of matters that are taking place where people have chilling impact against the laws of the United States of America. Gentlemen, I've been taking notes. I want to thank you for being here today. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. Frost from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, thank you so much for your service working at the IRS. Very important work. Let's get right into it. Mr. Shapley, you're blowing the whistle today because you feel like the Department of Justice provided preferential treatment to Hunter Biden. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes or no? That's correct. And you believe that Hunter Biden received that preferential treatment because his father is the Democratic president, Joe Biden. Is that correct?
I can't conclude why he's receiving the preferential treatment, but that is one conclusion you can come to.
Yeah, I mean, it's evident in your deposition that you believe that. Mr. Ziegler, did any of your supervisors explicitly tell you you're not allowed to investigate Hunter Biden because he's the president's son? Yes or no?
I was never told that.
You were never told that. Thank you. I mean, I know we're in your deposition. Did you suggest that there's some larger conspiracy at play here, which is what my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would have us believe, that there's a two-tier justice system that privileges Democrats over Republicans? And that's what my colleagues are doing. They're using you and using your story and using your work to make this argument for themselves. And since January 6th, these Republicans and Trump have complained about a two-tier justice system, co-opting the language of the decades-long civil rights movement for Black lives and Black freedom, a movement that they actually are actively looking to eliminate. There is a two-tier justice system, but it's not about Democrats versus Republicans. This language, two-tier justice system, has a real history. It has a real history of Emmett Till. It has a real history with Breonna Taylor. It has a real history with George Floyd, the Central Park Five, Derek Diaz, a young man who was just an unarmed young man who was just killed in Central Florida not but a week ago. And it has a real history with the Groveland Four Black boys from Central Florida who were falsely accused of kidnapping and sexually assaulting a white woman when they pulled over to help her when the car was broken. The fourth boy, who isn't pictured here, Ernest Thomas, wasn't apprehended initially. He was actually shot to death in his sleep. A 100-person mob wanted to get their hands on the remaining 3 black boys and couldn't, and so they took it out on the predominantly black town, shooting residents, looting, setting fire to their homes. Charles Greenlee was sentenced to prison for life. He was 16 years old. Now, just a quick trigger warning here for Black death and trauma, but it's an important story to tell when we talk about the two-tier justice system. Because on the way back from the courthouse, the sheriff took it upon himself to shoot the 2 remaining individuals, Walter Irvin and Samuel Shepard. Walter Irvin actually ended up living because when he was shot, he played dead, but the other one was shot, killed, Samuel Shepard. They were both handcuffed, as you can see in the photo, and were shot to death. They all died in either prison or on parole as convicted criminals. And in 2021, 72 years later, a judge exonerated them and the trial was considered a fraud. In closing, there is a two-tier justice system. It does exist, but it's not what my Republican colleagues want to say it is, using your story for that. It's not Republican versus Democrat. It's black, brown, and poor people versus everyone else. And I won't accept when Republican politicians look to appropriate the language of the movement for Black lives and civil rights to fit a political agenda to defend Donald Trump. This is the two-tier justice system. This is the two-tier justice system. And so we have to continue to fight for a world where this doesn't happen. This case about Hunter Biden is a case closed. And, I'll close with a question with the chairman. Considering the, quote, falsehoods, abuses, and misrepresentations of sensitive information that you presented here. When we're done with this made-up investigation, are you expecting to be censured by the House? The reason I ask is because it's in line with the logic and actions of the Republican Party here in the 118th Congress. Thank you. And I yield,
With the gentleman, yep.
I yield to the ranking member.
Thank you very kindly. Mr. Ziegler, you referred to an FBI supervisory special agent who went with you to try to interview Hunter Biden. Is that someone that you respect?
That wasn't me. That would have been my supervisor.
Okay, sorry, Mr. Shapley, you went with this SSA. Was that someone that you respect?
Yes, I respect the FBI SSA.
Because he came and did an interview with us, and he testified that over his decade of experience with the Delaware U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI agent never knew the Assistant U.S. Attorneys in Office or U.S. Attorney Weiss to allow any political considerations to influence their prosecutorial decisions in any case. Do you accept his judgment, or you disagree with his judgment about that?
So, yeah, the FBI SSA I respect, and it's a matter of timing. He retired in June of 2022, and at that time, I haven't even overcome the burden that it took me to say that this has been political and been politicized. It wasn't until October 7th, 2022. So, the FBI SSA, he came to his conclusions, and he wasn't there for that October 7th.
Can I mention something
Let
regarding
me
that?
just say, I respect very much your service, and I respect very much your testimony today, but I think it's completely within the realm of prosecutorial discretion and just subjective differences of opinion that people have. And those of us who've been in prosecution understand that happens all the time with prosecutors and investigators.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. It's good to have you here. Appreciate it. Appreciate your courage and your willingness to testify. Mr. Shapley, I'm going to go to pages 18 through 20 of your testimony. And Mr. Ziegler, I'm going to go to about page 104 to 105 of yours to start with. But while you're going there, I'm going to ask this question. We've heard a lot about this. Well, this 2014, 2015, 2016 tax things, Trump